welcome everybody. Thank you for making it out today. My name is Kelly. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative and alumni to the U of M. Our next session this afternoon is Revolt against Capitalism in Europe. We're now in the 5th year of the worst crisis of the capitalist system since the Great Depression. What we see from Madison, Wisconsin to Cairo, Egypt, from China to the streets of Barcelona, is the global fight back of the working class. Stephan is here from London to be an international voice on workers' struggle. This event is hosted by Socialist Alternative. Locally, we've got a 12-year history in the Twin Cities, organizing against budget cuts, home foreclosure, and other attacks on the working class through racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and so on. Socialist Alternative is a national organization with branches across the U.S. fighting similar struggles within their communities and for a socialist solution to the global crisis. Additionally, Socialist Alternative is a part of the Committee for Workers International, a worldwide socialist organization with a presence in over 45 countries across the world, on every continent, targeting the global capitalist system as the root cause of terrorism, wars, poverty, discrimination, and environmental destruction. Now, part of the reason we've brought Stephan here today is to encourage people to get involved with Socialist Alternative, to be a part of this international organization, and join the historic movement against capitalism. So, Stephan Koch is a representative from the International Secretariat, which is the elected global leadership body of the Committee for Workers International. He's here today from the London office. He's going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up and have time for questions and discussions. So let's welcome Stephan.
Thank you for giving me the chance to speak here, and I'm really looking forward also to the discussion to hear about your view on these developments. These are world developments, it's a world crisis of capitalism, and of course we've got to find a way together to have a joint fight back, to have a fight back against all these attacks and link it to a struggle where we can really get rid of capitalism, all the attacks fundamentally. I want to start with bringing you the greetings of all the members and sections of the CWI, the Committee for Workers International, and now organizing members, sections, groups, parties in 45 countries all around the world. And of course, we're looking towards the US, the developments here with the Occupy movement last year, with this huge debates about fundamental change, and I think it's a crucial time here in the US at the moment to find a way forward, to give answers to all the questions which were raised by Occupy, and I think I'll try to bring some of the developments, the conclusions, the discussions of Europe to this debate here. I think I'll try to help to develop a discussion around these questions then here. The developments in Europe at the moment are moving forward towards a situation where we could have the first European-wide, or at least Southern European-wide, general strike on the 14th of November. This is a huge development with a very explosive situation, mainly in Southern Europe, but then really posing all the questions of how to resist against austerity, against all the cuts, factory closures all over Europe, which forces the working class to give answers in a much broader sense than it used to be. There is the discussion of having this general strike on the 14th of November so far in Spain, Portugal and Greece, where the main trade union confederations are calling for this general strike. There's debate now in Belgium, in Italy, the smaller trade unions organized in the COBAS are calling for it. There are debates in Germany at the moment where it's more complicated with the overall mood, but where the left wing in the trade unions and people organized in the left party raised the question how to support this movement and organize protests on this day. And there is also a protest organized in New York by people looking in solidarity to the movement in Europe on the 14th of November in front of the Greek embassy at the UN. It gives a bit of a picture of how things are developing, but these are, well, the initiative for this day of strikes and protests was formally taken by the trade union leaders of Europe coming together and calling for this day of action. They are not leading. They are not giving a lead. They are pushed from below. And this is just as we discussed in the last session, where the members of the Chicago trade union, where they had to organize from below and to organize their opposition from below to have an alternative, to try to push leaders forward or to be prepared to replace them. This is the situation also in the same situation, but also with this question of strikes, general strikes, a strategy for the workers' movement all around Europe in the different countries. We see this especially in Greece. On the one side, we had 18 general strikes now since the beginning of the crisis. We have a huge attempt of the working class to fight back against really the whole misery imposed on workers. It sounds like 18 general strike, like one line, but this is not one line. This is an attempt to fight back, to strengthen the forces against all these attacks, and then huge setbacks. Setbacks where the government imposed wage cuts, now in the public sector, of 40% for the workers, where the minimum wage was reduced, where we've got a situation now where people are asked, if they go to hospital, they are asked to pay up front. Pensioners, where their pensions were cut to 600 euros, roughly, $500. But the pensions were cut, and then they come to hospital and they are asked to pay in advance. And the international corporation, the pharmaceutical corporations, they asked the Greek hospital to pay up front for medicine. They can't afford it. They don't have the medicine. It is really desperation, and again with these setbacks after big struggles and where nothing was won. People had to overcome this, start a new battle. So we've got waves of struggle, waves of demoralization. But where the decisive and impressive thing is how the Greek working class tries to overcome these barriers, trying to find ways to bypass the trade union leaders, blocking really the struggle, where we saw the movement of the enraged before Occupy, people coming together in the squares, assemblies to discuss a way forward, all the questions posed in the situation. How can we stop all these attacks? How can we move forward? We saw it in occupations of workplaces, where workers from below, when the trade union leaders did not offer a step forward. Where, for example, in February, workers occupied workplaces, electricity workers, other workers, municipality workers, to force the trade union leaders to step up and to organize then a 48-hour general strike. We've got this huge barrier where we've got to fight against to stop these attacks. Not only the capitalists, the capitalist politicians, all their different parties. It's also the battle for strategy forward in the workers' movement, in the labor movement, reflected on all different levels. Where does this explosive situation come from? I don't have the time, and I don't think with people here in this room it's necessary to explain a lot about this capitalist crisis going on for 5 years, but just a few things looking towards Europe. One is the social decline I mentioned, with Greece, but also with Spain. In Spain, for example, now also the unemployment of 50% of young people below 25 years, 50% are unemployed. Overall in the population, 25% unemployment. This is Spanish figures, similar in Greece. Developments in this direction are in France. There are also closures of factories, car factories were freshly announced. Attacks on wages and working conditions. What is going on? And at the same time, we've got a capitalist system in crisis on the world level. There's one crisis internationally, but how it is expressed in Europe is a special way of expressing the huge imbalances, the contradictions which were built up over the last 10 years or more. It's like 10 years because this is the lifetime of the euro, the joint currency of 17 countries inside the European Union. But of course, all these attempts to unify Europe over the last decades, and with then on top of that, the euro as a European currency. These were attempts to unify Europe under the interests of mainly German imperialism, together with French imperialism, the so-called Berlin-Paris axis, imposing their interests, but linked to a promise. For example, when the euro was implemented, it was a promise towards Spanish people, Portuguese people, of not only having peace in Europe, but having more and more integration, people to come together, develop Europe, and overcome the problems. What was happening was really the opposite, cushioned or hidden by the huge bubbles in the banks, the huge state debts which were built up over these 10 years, with relatively cheap access to debts and to finances for the state to build up these bubbles. Hidden by that, the imbalances between the different currencies, between the different economies, with a strong German economy and the weaker parts in the periphery, in Spain, Greece, Italy, these differences just were increasing, and the contradictions were building up. we have still the situation, what Karl Marx explained more than 150 years ago, that on the one side, the capitalist economy is moving towards internationalization. There is the dependencies are growing, it's one world economy, but at the same time, all the capitalist corporations, the capitalist class, is organized on a national level. They use their nation state. And in the case of Europe, it's on the one side that the capitalists needed to work together. I mean, they tried to work together against their competitors from the US, from Asia, China, whatever. They tried to work together against the working class in Europe, but the fundamental interests of the German ruling class are different than to those of the French ruling class, and this is now much more obvious than in the last 10 years. In this crisis, we see how the class struggle was really intensified. On the one side, the class struggle of the ruling class, the capitalists against workers, making working people pay for their crisis. They got everything they wanted over the last years, not everything, but they got a lot in attacks already before this crisis, in the boom, with their neoliberal policies of driving down wages, low-paid workers and so on. They were responsible for this crisis, but now they try to make us workers pay. But it's also a class struggle in Europe between the different ruling classes, where the German ruling class just has the position that they can be the winners of this crisis in making Spain, Greece, Italy pay for their problems and use their advantage in competition to increase or at least defend their profits in shrinking markets. These are some developments we are looking to and we are confronted with, and so we have all in this overall development of this crisis, we see a new form of like centrifugal forces, of the contradictions now exploding between the different nation states in Europe. But the whole question of whether the European Union and especially the euro as a joint currency could stick together are posed. And we as the Committee for Workers International, we discussed this long ago as just referring to this fundamental analysis of Marx and Engels of the competition between the different nation states. We think they in the end they are not able to stay in this, the euro as a joint currency. It will blow up, but to what price? What do they plan to do with this? We see that the setbacks already now, with the in the interest of the different national capitalist classes, are increasing the costs for the working class and are damaging huge parts of what was built up to have a basis of production and economical development. These centrifugal developments are also visible in the protest. When we look to Spain, we saw also in October huge mobilizations of the working class, of trade union resistance, of attempts to move forward to a general strike, which is now, as I said, a part of this European-wide initiative for general strike on the 14th of November. We saw also huge mobilizations of millions of people on the streets in demanding independence. For example, in Catalonia, in the streets of Barcelona, we saw huge demonstrations in the Basque country. We see this breaking up of the unity, of the formal unity, the unity imposed under the dictatorship of the markets, in the interest of German and French imperialism, which leads to fragmentation, where people are looking towards all kinds of answers to resist this unified attack of austerity coming from above, where German imperialism just orders the different governments in Ireland, Greece, or wherever to impose the austerity and cuts on their population. So the resistance is also, in a way, expressed in words and in protests against these against national governments, and takes form of the demand of national independence or moving in this direction. It was a challenge for the left and for the workers' movement. How do we do with that? How do we deal with that? We want, of course, the unity of the working class in action against this austerity. And we see, despite the fragmentation, with these steps towards a European-wide general strike, or at least Southern European general strike and protests in other parts of Europe, we see how the working class sees the need to work together, how this was enforced from below. First the Spanish and the Portuguese workers were moving in this direction, and then taking the initiative for this. there is this force to move together and fight back together. But at the same time, I think left people, socialists, have got to defend the right of people to have their own fate in their hands, defend their interests. And we think that only on a voluntary basis, with a voluntary joint struggle, with the full independence, free from all oppression, we can move forward to that. So we think the struggle for a European-wide socialist confederation of worker states is a struggle which needs to take also care of these interests of these people who have enough of being just confronted with the might of the European powers where they have nothing to say. And this is one element in the situation. It's also reflected partially in the developments of far-right forces and the dangers of fascism, which are developing in Europe at the moment. There are parts also of the capitalist class, parts of the media, using huge slander or nationalist lines against other countries to divide and rule. It's one feature in Germany at the moment that the Greek people are just denounced to be lazy and having swimming pools and whatever, just covering up what the German imperialism is imposing on Greece, on brutal cuts, on setbacks. We also see in some countries, like in Greece, like how the far right is trying to benefit from this situation. We see how Golden Dawn was able to increase its votes in the last elections, and where there's a real threat, where they seem to offer radical solutions. We know their program is linked or stays within the framework of capitalism, defending in the end the interest of the capitalists, but giving it a radical outlook with attacking immigrants, attacking left-wing people, attacking the trade unionists there, which really needs, where socialists, working class activists, trade unionists have got to give a sharp answer to all these forces mobilizing and building, but where this answer cannot just be that we've got to fight them because they are racist, because they're fascist, because they're reactionary. They are racist, they are fascist, and they are reactionary. But we've got to also see that the basis of their support is the desperation in huge parts of the population, and we've got to link the struggle against them to a program which is really offering a way out. A socialist program linked to the struggle against each and every single attack, but linking it to a struggle to overcome all the framework of capitalism, the framework which imposes all these cuts and austerity. And I think this program needs to be internationalist. It needs to have an idea how the power of the banks and corporations can be broken. We think we've got to link the daily struggles to the nationalization of the banks and financial institutions. We need to take over the big corporations, the commanding heights of the economy, and there needs to be workers' control and management implemented in that. This could lay the basis for a planned economy, but a planned economy based on a democratic plan in the interest of working class people, in the interest of working people and the mass of the population in general. Such a socialist program has nothing to do with the way the former East European countries were run, where a small, tiny elite, a bureaucracy commanded the whole society, the economy, and politics. We are fighting for a socialist democracy where every representative of the working class, every representative of such a future worker state has to be elected, subject to recall at any time, and where a workers' representative should get not at all more than an average worker they represent. We've got to make sure that our representatives live in the same world as we do, and that's what's needed. Such a program, I think, can really show a way forward against all this corruption, crony capitalism, which is now at the moment in place. And this is something which starts here and today. In the struggle in trade unions, as we discussed in the last session, as I mentioned it before, in the struggle to reclaim the unions for us, we need to fight for this kind of democracy. We need to fight for militant trade unions, and we've got to impose such tools here and now in the change. The question of a program to overcome these limitations which are put on our organizations in the trade unions. I think it's also in the core of it, in the essence of it, it's a struggle of program. We mentioned already today in the discussions the need for a new workers' party here in the US, but this is also absolutely necessary in most of the countries in Europe. And we had in the past organizations, parties, which claimed to be in the interest of the workers, which also workers tried to use as their tools, but we always had these battles within these organizations, with leaderships who were in the end integrated into the capitalist system, who defended the interest of the capitalists within our organizations. But even those organizations, like the Social Democracy in Germany or Labour in Britain, they got lost. Years ago, 20 years ago, the trade union leaders still refer to them, try to point to them, try to give them credit, like they try to give credit to the trade union leaders here, try to give credit to the Democrats here in the US. There's a different history, but this is an element now where there's a real parallel. For example, last Saturday, I was in London at a huge demonstration. It was hundreds of thousands, officially they said 150,000, I thought it was more, hundreds of thousands on the street against the austerity of this conservative far-right government. The trade union leaders, they spoke themselves, making vague promises, but they were forced even to speak about the general strike and a more generalized resistance because there is organized trade union resistance in the UK, in Britain, where also the sister organization of Socialist Alternative, the Socialist Party in England based, is involved in a national shop steward network, bringing together activists from below, fighting, especially also with positions in smaller public sector unions, for a real change, for a militant fight back against all these cuts. This battle is taking place at the same time as these trade union leaders on these huge demonstrations with hundreds of thousands angry about all these cuts coming there, and they've got nothing better to do than to invite the leader of the Labour Party, the so-called Labour Party, the party which was in power till the 2009 and implemented all these neoliberal attacks themselves, to invite him, and then Ed Miliband, this leader, stands there and announces, yeah, we've got to make tough choices, we've got to have some cuts, it's not possible to change everything and so on. Just preparing for future cuts under a future Labour government. I think it was obvious there, and he was booed for this, and it was obvious that we need a new tool for the working class in Britain as we need in the US, or as the debate is going on in other countries in Europe. But this is a complicated discussion. How we could get there? There are different attempts. We saw in Greece how Syriza was put on the spot to offer really a tool for the working class to fight back. Syriza is a left-wing alliance of different groups and organizations. In 2009 it got 5.4% roughly in the national elections. But with this huge crisis in Greece, it really shot this year. It got first in May election 17% and then 27%. How did this happen? I was in Greece in June 2011, and it was when there was these huge assemblies I mentioned before, and people were discussing, yeah, we need to get rid of this. At that time it was still a PASOK, so-called socialist movement, government imposing neoliberalism. How can we move forward? I was going around asking, oh, I'm also writing an article for socialistworks.net. What do you think what should happen? This government has got to go. I said, oh yeah, I agree, but what do you think what should come afterwards? And then people said, oh, I don't know, I don't mind, they just should go. It was huge anger, but it was obvious, there was something missing. But the impressive thing to me was that in which really fast speed the answers were given. Answers which are not ready yet, we are not there yet, we don't have a real tool, I'll try to explain it a bit with Syriza. But within 1 year, these huge movements pushed Syriza in a position that we had when I came back to Greece this year in June. We had discussions, what should the left government do next Monday? Syriza it was possible for Syriza to win a majority. I think it was the mistakes of Syriza which did cost them the majority at this time. It's still the most likely perspective to come that there will be a Syriza-led government in Greece. But we had discussions then, not just we need a different government, but we had very concrete discussions. What should be done there here and now immediately? there were meetings of Syriza. They put up some posters in the streets of Athens or Thessaloniki, then in different areas, here 100, there 150, there 200, came together to discuss, and then there were Syriza MPs or candidates answering the questions, and people raised all kinds of questions. What will Syriza do next Monday? What will they do? What will they do with the immigrants? Were people who had more concerns, more worries there? There were immigrants saying, oh, how can you defend our interests? Working class people, what will you do for my hospital? Really a very good debate. But the answers, they were so far a bit weak. When one, for example, of the Maoists, who was later on elected as an MP in Thessaloniki, at the meeting I was, he said, it's not, you ask us what we do, but this is the wrong question. It's not about what Syriza does. It was what we all together do. And then he failed to give an answer, just hiding behind this general thing. Of course, we are convinced that there will be only a way out if the working class itself, not just Syriza, takes the next steps. But a leadership is there to give answers, and we've got to develop these answers. So there was a weakness in the answers of Syriza and not a clear plan. But the whole pressure that there needs to be a party in our interest, this was visible there, and now Syriza was put on the spot. The debates are now really heavily in Syriza. Should we break with the European Union, with the Euro? What are the alternatives? There are worries of a lot of people in Greece about these steps. I think there is a clear need for socialists to be there in these battles, to give answers about how a way out could be developed with what I mentioned, with a plan, an emergency plan in the case of Greece, to redevelop the society, starting with a jobs program, using the resources which are there by imposing capital controls, stopping the outflux of capital, which is still happening and still organized by all the European powers, to continue, take the wealth in the hands of working people and really change society based on that, redeveloping industry under workers' control and management. There needs to be a strategy how such a workers' government, which is really, they called it in Greece a left government, but that's it about. How could a government based on the working class give an answer? How this government could function? I think it's really essential that even if this government, a Syriza government, would be elected on in normal parliamentarian elections, it can't survive to implement the necessary tasks to attack the big corporations, to nationalize the banks and financial institutions, if it does not base itself on this movement. And we've got these examples where not only in Greece, also in Spain, there are these assemblies in the neighborhoods developing from below, where people come together. We use this example in Greece and Spain and Portugal to say this is what we also need in the workplaces, especially in the workplaces. Workers coming together, discussing the needs, developing their proposals, their answers, electing delegates. These delegates should come together locally and then nationally to be a real basis for workers' government, to base itself on the movement, on the structure of the movement, on the structures of the organized working class. These movements, such a government has to break with the power of capitalism and has also got to base itself then in a much deeper way on its committees. Only such committees or assemblies, or however you would like to call it, are able to confront also the threat of the fascists, of the threat of Golden Dawn in the neighborhoods, reorganizing socially the community, but also really physically stopping them from attacking immigrants, trade unionists. This is a basis for really how workers could implement their interests and organize it on the ground to move forward. These are the challenges we see at the moment in the different parts of Europe, in different debates linked to these new formations. I mentioned Syriza. In Spain, it's the debate about the united left, where also the CP is included, but the debates also go, how can we organize a resistance which is strong enough to unite workers all around the country? There are, unfortunately, with these questions of nationalism, debates on the left, where the united left in Spain just argues the case that this would be a question of a class question, a social question. They do not see how this really huge anger about the austerity imposed by the national government is also reflected in the feelings of the sentiments of people which then argue for independence, and which of course is used also by the right-wing parties, conservative parties. There's a very complicated situation now. We're also in the Basque Country or in Catalonia, other left forces develop. We've got to be very flexible. We are arguing for the unity of these left forces to come together, to fight together, to develop the structures, to discuss a strategy for the working class. I think this is one thing which is really essential for any attempt to develop a new workers' party, that it offers a chance to bring activists of different struggles together to discuss a program. This does not mean, I think it's obvious, that socialists from the beginning should argue their case and should offer the ideas of how to break with capitalism, how to move forward, but the framework of a party which does not care about the interest of the corporations, but offers the framework to discuss a strategy, how to defend our interests. That's decisive. That's what we are looking for and what's developing. In France, this is now at the moment. I can't, unfortunately, go into the details of the former attempts with the Nouveau Parti Anticapitalist, new anti-capitalist party, which was lost at the moment. Therefore, these attempts to develop a new tool for workers is focused around the Front de Gauche, left front, with the left party and the CP involved in it. Huge debate. Again, debates where socialists are very essentially needed. There is a strong wing coming in this case, a strong wing coming from the Communist Party to argue we should look towards elections, should look towards coalitions with the so-called Socialist Party in France. This is just another neoliberal party which was lost for the working class. But those people looking towards coalitions, where the other wing, it's more complicated, but the other wing is more looking towards mobilizations on the ground against, for example, this fiscal treaty, a treaty all over Europe, imposing austerity and cuts forever. That's the plan of the capitalists. But this battle between just people looking towards elections and coalitions, I think we've got to be a strong force inside them to resist this, to root such a new formation in the movement of the working class, and in an approach that we reject coalitions with pro-capitalist forces. Not that we can't vote with them if they really would like to implement anything in our interest. No problem to vote together in parliament for a minimum wage or whatever, but to have any kind of concession, any deal, any coalition or whatever, to give them credit, it's just disarming our forces, the forces we've got to develop. And these are essential tools I think we've got to bring into these debates. In France, where I gave the example at the moment, but similar discussions are taking place also, for example, in Germany, where Die Linke, the left party, was formed, and is trying to move forward, trying to find a way forward, but also locked in these battles, which are there also focused on the question, how can we have an influence in the trade union movement? How can we help the trade unions to develop the debate about the strategy forward? In Germany, this is linked to the question of breaking with the social democracy, one of these parties which moved over to the right and is implementing neoliberal policies, where an alternative is needed, where the left party is also needed to give answers, but some of the left party leaders, again, are just looking towards coalitions and collaboration where this battle is taking place. I think these are some elements we see which are developing, and I'm sure which came up in the Occupy movement also here, which will come up in the future developments in attempts to form a real tool for workers and young people, working class people in general here in the US. I think this outlines some of the tasks we've got to confront, and I think these are tasks where we've got to have an international debate to draw conclusions from, to move forward, to give an answer. It's absolutely shocking for a lot of people that after 5 years of crisis, they don't have any answer. I mean, the main debate between the different European capitalists representatives is, should we have austerity or should we have austerity plus a small size of stimulus? And the fundamental solution, for example, Christine Lagarde, chair of the IMF, put forward is, let's have first of all stimulus and austerity immediately afterwards, so let's have a balance of that. I mean, in the way they solved their crisis, is they just, with bailing out the banks, with taking over all the debts, they made the problem bigger. Now we've got this huge sovereign debt crisis in Europe, and still the banks are not safe. The Wolfgang Müncher, one of the commentators in Financial Times, he spoke now about the Spanish bomb, because there, it's just the focus is changing. The problems are always the same, but they're just looking where the next explosion might develop. And that's in Europe. It's at the moment. It's mainly Spain. In a way, they gave up about Greece. It's just a question of time when they try to kick out Greece. They are hesitant about kicking Greece out of the European currency union, the euro, because they fear the contagion towards Portugal, Spain at the moment. Spain is the main thing they are looking towards. It just shows that they've got no tool. They developed after 5 years of crisis. They did not develop any fundamental answer. They did not even find an answer how they could redevelop their own profits. Of course, they did not develop anything in the interest of working class people. This is where we're confronted with, where the working class in Europe is, after years of setbacks and also a lot of confusion after the fall of Stalinism in 89, 90, setbacks in the trade union movements, setbacks on the political level, disarmament of the working class. But the working class is now really pushed forward and put on the spot. Workers don't like it. Young people don't like it to be forced in such conditions. They were forced to give answers in such circumstances, and especially given the weakness of market forces, this tends to be much more explosive than we like. I mean, in general, we think explosive movements are something nice, and I'm really in favor of that. But I mean, if you don't have the tools, the organizations prepared for that, then explosions could also mean that a lot of energy is just, it shows up and then it's lost somewhere in the air. And it's not, there is nothing to take this energy, to build, to bring people together and to change something for the future. I think this is something which the Occupy movement in the US opened up, a period where people saw, we can't go ahead, we need to change something, but now there are the debates, how do we do that? What's coming afterwards? These are debates which follow from these huge developments. I'm sure that the 14th of November, with this Southern European general strike protest in other parts of Europe, will increase the questions of the way forward for the workers' movement. And this is where we can really contribute and help to build, not only in Europe, not only in the US, but internationally, to give answers. I know I was asked to speak about Europe. In the last 1 minute, I just want to make a small reference to South Africa. I think the huge developments of this strike wave, hundreds of thousands coming from the South African miners, shows how this explosive situation can push all organizations to the side, where the National Union of Miners was so discredited that these miners really ad hoc set up new committees from below, strike coordinating committees, to organize themselves, to represent themselves. This could be a basis for a real new trade union movement. The whole question of political representation is posed there in a very sharp way, with the ANC now so discredited that people are looking towards answers. Our small forces, the Democratic Socialist movement, the sister organization of Socialist Alternative here in the US, the DSM in South Africa, played a leading role, a crucial role in arguing for these strike coordinating committees to have really a representation of the workers themselves in these battles, in the negotiations. We played a crucial role in defending against all these attempts to ask workers, yes, it was nice, but now stop the strike, we've got to negotiate. No, to defend it, to keep on striking until the workers are satisfied with their demands are met. We've got now a crucial position where we're discussing to set up a new mass workers' party in South Africa based on the miners moving into action. This shows, I think it's really inspiring. It shows how these developments we mentioned in the discussions before, I tried to mention here in relation to Europe, how they could really develop in a fast and dramatic way, and which we can look towards, I think, with a lot of optimism, but with a lot to do for all of us.